Why does a 50-year-old horror movie about a chainsaw-wielding cannibal still hold a mirror up to the American soul? As our nation hits its 250th birthday, the American experience is everywhere. We're talking about ideals, failures, victories, themes for our entire 250 years as a nation. And on this episode, we're going to do that, but with the help of a truly horrifying film, Tobe Hooper's 1974 low-budget masterpiece, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And to do this, we've brought in a very special guest to help us answer questions like, how does a film that's so aggressively nihilistic actually help us survive the real world? Can we learn about America through Leatherface and Sally Hardesty? What can we glean from them to dissect this theology and psychology and everything behind the mask? I'm sitting down with author and theologian Dr. Kutter Callaway. Man, this is a long time coming, man, and I'm pretty excited for Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Hey, I'm excited too. Thanks for inviting me on. It'll be fun.
We were connected by a mutual friend, Josh Patterson, who has sat down for a few of these chats, and he was like, "You got it. You got to talk to Kutter. He's got a great eye and great mind for this." So I wanted to bring you on to discuss some specific movies around the 250th anniversary of the United States. But also, you have a book coming out, and I wanted to let people know about that book and where they can go find it. Maybe just elevator pitch us, man.
Sure. Thanks. Well, it's you can find it where all fine books are sold. Principally, you can pre-order right now on Amazon. Title is Be Afraid, and I always forget the subtitle because, but it's something like how the horror franchise or horror movies can help us find, something about God in film. So if you go on Amazon, or you can go to cuttercallaway.com. Oh, here it is. What horror reveals about facing the darkness? Okay, that's way better than what I just said.
Ooh, those crisp tagline there.
Yeah. What horror reveals about facing the darkness? So, and that's actually kind of captures the sort of heart of the book is, what is this genre? Principally TV and film. I touch on maybe some literature and stuff, but it's primarily TV and film. What is it to say about kind of the underlying fears that we hold as a society, as people? And then what does theology make of that in terms of, but not just the films, but then also kind of those underlying fears and anxieties that we're dealing with. So purchase it now, and it'll come out on September 29th.
Well, I'm very excited to get my own copy. I know that you do have a chapter in the book about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Correct me if I'm wrong?
Well, it's not a deep dive. It actually sets up where I describe growing up not growing up. Well, I grew up. I haven't grown up yet. But being in Texas, I was born in Texas. My grandparents lived in West Texas, and talking about sort of that space, that landscape as a setting for things like the Chainsaw, and like how that's sort of in my bones. And so I do talk about slasher films and others, but I won't spoil it. But my slasher film analysis isn't focused explicitly on Chainsaw Massacre. It's on a few others. And then where I do get it, it's more focused on the reboot and what happens there than the original. So
okay. So would you say that growing up, spending some of your formative years in Texas, informed your introduction to this film, your appreciation of this film? How did this movie kind of come into your sphere?
Well, it's a good question. I hadn't thought about that. I honestly don't remember the first time I watched it. I remember the most recent time I watched it and recalled how it actually was in the run up to this past Halloween. I was just binging some classics.
Right.
And I was like, oh man, I forgot how just odd this movie is. Through and through is so odd in so many ways. But my introduction to it came basically in the process I went through, both writing the book and then creating the podcast that goes by the same name.
Right.
Which was, I've never been in the past like a horror fan. I avoided it on purpose. And so me doing a sort of deep dive in the horror genre was me saying I can't any longer call myself an expert in popular culture and theology and ignore what is now a third of box office receipts. So I couldn't in good conscience do it. So I'm like, I'm going to do a deep dive. And so, I knew of the film in terms of cinema studies and what it meant and how people analyze it, but I hadn't returned to it until, just a few years ago when I kind of started going, okay, I'm going to muster up the courage to really face my fears and start watching this stuff. And that's why I'm going, I think some of the reason as a kid growing up, a movie like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was so deeply disturbing was because it was taking place in a very familiar environment, right? That
Yeah.
and I find that really interesting in the horror genre as a whole, where it often takes those spaces and places that are familiar and safe, and it turns it on its head. It's like, oh no, actually, these are terrifying sights, and
Yeah.
you're not safe at all. And so I'm like, so that's I think kind of my first exposure.
So two things you said there. Just I kind of like feel. I almost feel like Josh was pulling a prank on me there because I described my desire to want to do this project for myself because for the longest time I was told like, horror movies are bad, horror movies are evil. I grew up in church and it was not like you didn't tell people that, I didn't have a lot of discussions about my love of the Alien franchise in youth group.
Yeah.
But I had kind of convinced myself that movies were too scary, they were too horrifying for me to, one, enjoy, and two, appreciate on a deeper level. And a few years ago, I forget I was watching John Carpenter's Halloween, talk about subverting a common place of safety. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I think I psyched myself out of some of the greatest movies I've never seen. And, that started a slow, but, steady growth. So to hear you say that, and, I just that's very affirming. And the second thing I just thought of there was how truly how many movies that would follow the Texas Chainsaw Massacre did subvert a safe place. Carpenter subverting the suburban home, summer camp. I was like, hey, let's go to summer camp and like go on canoeing trips and campfires. It's like, or avoid a machete wielding killer. High school is a big setting where it's just like, are you safe in high school? Not if you're Jamie Lee on prom night, you're not. Things like that. I'm excited to talk about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre because it really predates all of those. It's this incredible mid-70s horror just gem. And I can honestly say getting ready to have this conversation was the first time I had seen it. And
Nice.
I told, so thank you.
Oh, no.
There was a friend of mine named Jason who was really pushing me. It's his favorite movie of all time. And he's just like, he's pushing me and pushing me. He's like, you got to watch it. And I was like, actually, I got this conversation coming up. And he was like, oh, I'm so proud of you. So I've been able to discuss it so far and I really did enjoy it. But this movie is so ripe with allusions to things happening in America in 1974, 1973 when they're developing it. There's so much going on. And before we jump into the discussion, I just want to give a little bit of a synopsis and a little bit of a breakdown of some things in this film. It's directed by famously Tobe Hooper, who would go on to do many other things, but this definitely has his fingerprints all over it. Stars Marilyn Burns, Paul Partain, Edwin Neal, Jim Sydow, who was phenomenal in this movie, and Gunnar Hansen as the iconic Leatherface. It was released October 11th, 1974, and it was made, talking about movies that nowadays where it makes up a third of the box office. Everyone's talking about these horror movies like Obsession and Backrooms that were made for teeny tiny budgets. This movie was made for anywhere between $80,000 and $140,000. Like that's insanity.
It is.
It's incredible, and it grossed a little over 30 million, and it's just some crazy cool stats to look at when you think of a movie that is over 50 years old and still is maintaining its relevancy. Cutter, I'm sure you've done a lot of your own research and a lot of your own investigation into horror being this therapeutic process. Like, it doesn't feel like it should be that way, maybe instinctually, but there is this way you process real world trauma with horrific fiction. And set us back in the context of this film. What is going on that people are going to this film and they're bringing these anxieties with them to the experience of this horrific movie?
Yeah, it's an interesting way to think about it. And a guy named Douglas Cowan wrote a book called A Sacred Terror, and he coined this term sociophobics, which is essentially getting at what you're at. Like these are indicators of the kind of societal fears, that are driving people. And then on the trauma side, it's interesting. There's a guy named Colton Scrivener and a team that he runs. These are psychologists that study horror and fear and sort of like morbid curiosity, this sort of thing. And they're contemporary people, and they studied folks who consumed horror fiction this included beyond just films, but horror fiction, and were fans of it and did a lot of reading and watching of horror films during COVID. And what they found was that compared to the average population, they actually navigated their mental health. They were able to navigate the effects of COVID in ways that led to better mental health outcomes than the comparison group who didn't, which is fascinating to me. Meaning, not only are you right to say that there's some sense in which we're going to these films that are terrifying as a way to, even if not consciously, as a way to kind of like work through some of the stuff of real life. And it actually is helpful. It's, because a lot of people, the messaging that I got as a kid or whatever is like, oh, it makes it worse, right? Like, oh, you're being shaped and harmed by these images, and then you're going to go out and do bad things like that. It's like, actually, no, the real world is violent and scary and dark, and here is a safe place where I can actually process that trauma. So I was born in 1979. So most of my knowledge of that era is, secondhand research of like what was going on. But it's fascinating because I also think the parallels to now, and that is Vietnam is winding down. Watergate has happened.
Ravaged.
And there was actually an oil crisis in 1973, right? So we're at a time where we realize the government is willing to lie to us on a mass scale. We are in the midst of a seemingly endless war that was morally bankrupt, according to most people. No end in sight. We didn't win. And then we're actually struggling with putting gas in cars because of an oil crisis. It's like, okay, that's interesting. The additional thing that I think there's the parallel to now is, and this comes up explicitly in the movie, which is sort of the industrialization of prior work. So, the family in the movie are literally sort of displaced slaughterhouse workers that lost their jobs because of a new technology for slaughtering cattle, right? And so it's like, it's directly on the nose of going, these are the people that are left behind by these new innovations in technology that put on a mass scale things that before you had to have humans actually do. And it's like a reflection on like, okay, what happens with these people? Where do they go? Are they forgotten by society?
Yeah.
And in the air, all these other things about oil and government and wars and stuff. And so that's kind of what people back then were dealing with and were kind of grappling with in their day-to-day lives. And then they go and land here in the middle of the dry heat of Texas. And so the story begins.
I thank you for drawing the parallels, because I think I kind of loosely mean, like, there has to be parallels to now. Like, I feel like American culture kind of works cyclically. When, this happened, well, don't worry, there's going to be a version of that in a little bit, and the next generation is going to have their own version of that. But like, the correlations to Vietnam, the energy crisis of the early 70s, and the industrialization thing, I love that that scene at the beginning of the film where the hitchhiker, where Nubbins says, like, it's so much better now. You can do it so much easier now. And his family is actively part of being phased out. Like, so he's enamored with this technology, but also his family has directly suffered from the use of this technology.
Yep.
The last thing would be like the fact that Nixon becomes the first president to resign from office, the only president to resign from office. Spiro Agnew resigns amidst a separate scandal. There's this tension that I think the movie builds beautifully through giving those news reports of the current events throughout, that underlying background of just like things are constantly happening. Things will not stop happening, because on a surface level, I looked at that and I was like, this feels random. But with most masterpieces, their oddest elements are not random.
Yeah.
And it only was when I got to the end of the film, I was like, oh my gosh, that's so genius.
Yeah.
And I loved the correlation to now. The overall tone of the movie is, I saw this term in a few different reviews of films, aggressively nihilistic. How does this movie, the tone that it takes towards themes like death and decay, what do you take from how this movie approaches things as serious as death?
Yeah. Well, one thing I would say, there's a bunch that you could say about it. I tend to think, and this is actually where I go in the book a little bit when it comes to, slasher films in general, asking that question of what is the value of seeing bodies just brutalized? Like what that seems to be nihilistic. It seems to, and there are some, like I would say the name's escaping me, but the Terrifier series, for
I was
example,
gonna say, is it Terrifier?
is deeply nihilistic in a very and that's why I mentioned that one, because I don't recommend that for anybody to watch. That's like one
Hmm.
series where I'm like, I'm not going to tell you to go watch it.
Okay.
I would encourage someone to watch Texas Chainsaw Massacre, because at the end of the day, is it Sally?
Yeah,
Sally,
Sally.
she survives, and it's brutal, but she survives, and it's left open. He's chainsaw,
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
air, whatever. But that alone is a hopeful little glimmer that sometimes you go, that's actually a success. Like that you survived this is actually saying something about the value of what it means to be alive. And then our revulsion at the grotesque nature of it and all that happens is itself, I think, an indication that no matter what we say or think or do about these like physical bodies of ours, we actually treat human life as if it's precious. So to violate it violates our sensibilities, because deep down we're like, oh, I actually think every human life is sacred. And the reason this is so terrifying and the reason it's so horrifying in its brutality is because we really live that way. We really do believe that, whether we like it or not. The nihilism part, though, I think, how would I describe it? The other interesting thing about the family is that they are actually applying the exact same logic of the slaughterhouse, but just not with cows,
Right.
right? So it's actually a very coherent kind of step, but you just removed the kind of moral line that had been set up between, say, cows and humans.
Yeah.
And they
Right.
just said, we're gonna like remove that, right?
No
But
distinction.
yeah, but logically, they're doing the exact same kind of thing. And so I think rather than nihilistic, what that's doing is basically trying to throw into our faces this notion that, hey, behind all of our niceties and our politeness and the way society would like us to think, just behind that is basically no difference between us slaughtering humans and slaughtering people. And you have to acknowledge we're making these distinctions, these moral, theological distinctions that
Yeah.
really do matter. Because if you remove it, this is what you get. You're applying the same logic and asking us to go, I think, as a society, well, where do we get those boundaries from? What does distinguish or force us to go, oh, actually, slaughtering a human is different than slaughtering an animal, or slaughtering an animal in this way is different than slaughtering an animal in this way, or all the sort of things. And so that's where I think it has a surface of nihilism, but it's inviting us to think in ways that I would say aren't pure nihilism. It's
Okay. I love that distinction of like the insanity of it. It's like, well, okay, how close are you actually to that? Because at one point, I'm assuming, and I don't know the Texas Chainsaw lore as deeply as I fear I will know in a few months after I've watched all
yeah,
the movies.
yeah.
But at one point, the Sawyer family had to have been socially acceptably normal at some point, because they even say like Grandpa was the best killer of them all, and like they're alluding to the slaughterhouse. But now that, like you said, that line is gone. That moral like distinction is gone,
Yeah.
and it raises the question that we talked a little bit about the hitchhiker, the new exciting ways to kill, but then like your family changed, not just psychologically but economically, the consumer aspect of it and how it affects you, like that all shifts and their family becomes this new thing. When it comes to mass consumption and that newer way, that easier way, that better way for a corporation, that cheaper way to make more, like how do you see that both like in the film and then maybe paralleled to now, or exponentially bigger now, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, even, and again, whether or not this was the critique he had in mind at that time, I don't know, because
Yeah.
The kind of, what do you call it, the industrial agricultural complex now
Yeah.
that exists on a scale that did not even then, like, so. But
Right.
this is why, great art, in my mind, it becomes great because it's enduring, meaning like it helps us think about now, even though it was made then, like it keeps
Right.
helping us. So go, okay, So he's anticipating something that even he obviously had no knowledge of. But it is really interesting to say, why are we as a society in these industrialized societies so disconnected? Let's simply talk about food. We are so disconnected from the food that we eat, the process by which it's cultivated, raised, prepared, delivered, etc. We're radically disconnected to that. And that's very convenient because for people who might otherwise not enjoy the process of slaughtering beef.
Yeah.
Which is a very violent, bloody thing. And
Yeah.
and you go, okay, well, you're not actually anti-violence. You just want it out of sight, out of mind, right? And so the industrialization of it makes it just more efficient, more convenient to disguise any of the sort of moral questions that we have about it. But there is a huge, obviously right now, a huge uptick of people actually for either ethical reasons or Christian reasons or whatever, who want to kind of rethink this whole thing and get close to, even in my own family for Father's Day, which we just had, we had ribs and they were delicious. And so one of the kids is like, wait, is this from like 2 different cows? I was like, well, I think it's pigs, but also, is it like 1 whole pig, like 2 ribs or 1? They're asking. And I was like, yeah,
Right.
the fact that we don't know this, maybe we should agree as a family that we only eat, if we eat meat, it's only the meat that we kill and prepare. And they're all like, no, they resist it. But it gets back to, because like everybody else, my kids have been shaped to say the primary instinct is to do things that allow me to consume without needing to ask questions, without being troubled, without it being, difficult. And to get to that point, we as a society have to make a whole lot of decisions that get us there, and they relieve us of the kind of moral tension that should be involved.
Yeah.
And then deliver to us something delicious. And I think that is a really interesting question that this film, either indirectly, directly, intentionally or not, kind of raises for us in a horror film.
Yeah. Well, I think you could even extrapolate it out a little bit further to say that the way that both companies and mass consumption treat stock now, and the critique that directly or indirectly Texas Chainsaw Massacre has with consumption back in the early 70s, can in a way speak to how, as livestock, consuming whatever is coming down the chute, we're being directed in these ways. And like you said, we're being separated further and further from anything that would make the purchase not happen. So like, if you don't have to look that pig in the face, if you don't have to look that cow in the face, good. That company doesn't want you to look it in the face.
No.
So
baby cows are adorable.
Exactly. I remember my dad worked in a slaughterhouse for first few years when I was a kid. He said it was the most horrifying thing he had ever experienced, and he was in the military. Like, but it was the industrialization of it. It was the casualness of it.
Yeah.
And
well,
yeah.
Well, it makes me also think, as we then kind of shift, or if it's not just directly animals, right, that it also raises, and that's why this film raising the different issues of government and who's to be trusted and war and oil. So think about just Americans' relationship to gas. It's amazing to me, and this is a consumer thing. Like, why do we have gas? Because we have cars. What, it's like we have to drive them because we have to do this. And so many actual wars have been fought and affect gas prices. And the primary thing that people care about is not the war, is not the dying, is not the people that are, in some distant country as Americans to us. It's how does this affect my gas prices, which is crazy. There's not like how are we making decisions about whether or not we should be in a war based upon, does this cost me more when I pump gas into my car? That's obviously a consumer driven mentality.
Right.
That, back to the thing, as long as I don't have to think about it, I'll support my country going out and engaging in war, justified or not. People's lives are ending in order, as long as you keep my gas price comfortable. Like that was happening back in the 70s. It's happening now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The clutching of pearls when gas gets, closer to $4 or over $4. I can't speak to your part of the country, but like if it gets near $4 here, like people start rethinking some shit.
Yep.
And it was like, but you do realize like children and families died. Like and you have like there was no clutching of pearls there.
Yep.
But like
Yep.
cheaper gas for your car was the thing that activated you enough.
Yep. Yep.
There is something fundamentally broken in that.
Yeah. And that's where I mean, it's actually over $6 here. Cheap gas here is $6. The expensive is like $6.99. So, and again, not to say that it's wrong to be upset or worried or frustrated because gas is so expensive, because it is hard. Like, we do have to get to our job. We do have to pay. I am morally superior because I drive an EV, so it's not even an issue. But yes, it's
great.
It is a problem that is what we could describe as a horror, but we don't think of it in those terms until we see it in a genre like this. I mean, I was an adult when 9/11 happened, and I remember very clearly the messaging after 9/11 was, because we were worried about what would happen to the economy and all this other stuff, and it was, Americans, don't let this stop you from purchasing stuff. Like, keep going and buying, keep doing stuff. Don't let the terrorist win. And the way we don't let the terrorists win is if we buy stuff. And I was just like, wait, what? So at every turn, that is kind of the what some would call the social imaginary of what it means to be an American, is deeply entrenched now in this consumerist mindset, and without regard for the real world harm and violence and tragedy that requires for us to be able to actually do it. Yeah, we could go on for that, but we're now getting detached from the movie, I guess. So.
Well, I do think it not only does it speak to the audience 50 plus years ago viewing this for the first time, and I'm sure having that that syllabus shock of like, oh, this stuff is coming at me, but then those that stepped outside of Leatherface and the chainsaw and Sally and screaming and the close-up eyeball shots, like stepping outside of that, being like, oh my gosh, I think this has the deeper value that I didn't expect it to have. That going back to the nuclear family aspect of the Sawyers who are affected by this industrialization, and Sally and Franklin who are there in this area for a family related reason. They're going to see a grave of, I believe, their grandfather, and there is both a sense of they are wanting to make sure that the grave is preserved, but then the people who are perverting the graves are in their own way a perversion of the nuclear family. That their perversion of it, like the dinner scenes.
Yeah.
What, like, why is that? Like, every Texas Chainsaw movie has a scene like that, and why is that principle? It's principal iconography for this franchise.
Yep. Yeah. It's like the like a Black Mass version of what we think about is this sort of sacred American ritual, right? The Norman Rockwell.
Yes.
It is. And even today, right? I mean, that people will talk about the nuclear family as like the thing that is propping up all of Western democracy. Like if that goes down, the whole thing goes down. And so you could take it a few different ways. One, clearly, I think the film is doing that sort of like Black Mass thing, right? Like, this is a profane version of something that is held sacred. And it's deeply unsettling because that reveals, I think, well, there's sort of two things. There's two ways to go about it if you're going to think about it, let's say, theologically. So on the one hand, what they are doing as a family is a kind of what I would call idolatry. And idolatry from a theological perspective is essentially a good that becomes misdirected. It itself isn't a good. So what happens when you take something that God has created and given humans, and then you distort it in a way that all of a sudden it's functioning in a way that should be reserved for God, right? So that's kind of what I mean by idolatrous.
Yeah.
So they've distorted, misdirected, because structurally all the elements are there, right? This is just a lovely nuclear family loving each other and doing good by murdering people, right? So clearly we say that's not good,
right?
Even though it's a really close-knit nuclear family.
They're very close.
Yes, they're very close. But the other thing is, back to kind of similar like the bodies, like our revulsion at it reveals the things that we hold sacred, right? And a question we could ask as Americans, and I actually think as American Christians then, is that if that is so revolting and so effective and how profoundly it affects us. It reveals something about the way we really do imagine the nuclear family. We really do imagine the nuclear family as sacred. And that theologically is a problem, because Jesus very clearly says it's not biological kin that count as my family. These are not my brothers and sisters. Those who do the will of my Father are my brothers and sisters. So he's literally saying, he's not saying nuclear families are bad. He's just saying this isn't where the sacredness lies.
Yeah.
And as soon as you see it as a indispensable part of your society, you might actually be committing an idolatry. Like you actually hold this nuclear family up in a way that it shouldn't be. When you're this revolted by the film doing something with it, it might reveal that kind of idolatry lying underneath. So those are kind of the two ways I would think about it in terms of how at least this movie, and I haven't watched all of the various different spinoffs to know if it's similar, but that's sort of my first cold take. Is that a cold take? I guess it's not really a hot take.
I mean, hit me like it's on a bricks. I'm thinking about this. I love the idea of like if something in horror fiction, in a movie, in a book, in a show rubs up against that part of you, like that zeal, that anger you feel. It's like you may be placing a imbalanced amount of importance on that and ascribing it the sacredness that it has. It makes me think, how many times have either a politician or a activist or somebody in the public sphere said, well, here's the way we get America back on track, man. We just have to, put more effort into the family. It's like, okay, I don't fundamentally disagree with you, but I'm a little concerned with that being the principal messaging. Because of what happens to single moms who don't fit that description? What happens to couples that aren't just like, well, it's mom, dad, one boy, one girl, white picket fence? What happens to them when they don't meet the ideal of the American family you have in mind? What happens to them? Are they ostracized like the Sawyers? Do they like what happens there with that? Because I think a lot of times when that sentiment is given, that unorthodox formations of family are not in mind.
Yeah.
And you saying that kind of just like hit like a ton of bricks.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. And, I don't stretch it too far, but I mean, here's a group committed to the nuclear family and it goes poorly. So it might have helped if we said, oh, what would have happened if each of them, given they've been left behind by society and the industrialization of this, what if they found deep kinship and networks with people outside of their family that clearly their family couldn't resolve? Right. Maybe we wouldn't have gotten a massacre. Maybe they would have responded in slightly more pro-social ways, as the psychologists say. But instead, they turned inward and it became its own sort of toxic thing. So, again, not to say there's anything bad or wrong about nuclear families. They're great, but they're not the solution to everything that plagues us.
Right. And it's not as simple as just saying like, well, if families just looked like this, then everything would, like, that's too simplistic of a way to fix an imperfect society.
Yep.
To kind of draw us to a close on this 250th anniversary special kind of discussion of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, does viewing a film like Texas Chainsaw Massacre pull us towards a kind of more bleaker view? Or what is the light? What is the hope that you would take from this? And I know this kind of depends on how you naturally kind of view the world. But for you personally, like, what do you walk away from this movie feeling? What's the vibe going out from it?
Yeah, I don't want to overstate it, especially if anyone's listening and maybe hasn't seen it yet. Like, because I am what I call a chronic appreciator, and so generally I try to find something that's redeemable or good, or something like that. So, but sometimes that means I'm like, it is a hard movie. It's an odd movie. It ends in really unresolved mess of a ending. I do think it takes, if you just watch it and don't pause afterwards and kind of think differently about it, it could leave you pretty despairing. I mean, it is a pretty dark movie, right? It doesn't offer any solutions and it is bad. But I think this is worth the value of like film criticism just in general, but then also talking to just other people that see different things. But then also what I would call theological criticism of film, meaning kind of stopping and going, all right, what might we make of this that just surface read or an initial thing doesn't deliver? And that's where I do think what I'd said earlier about, I do think this notion of it exposing to us brutally in all its horror some of the consequences of the society that we have designed, I think that's helpful. And not that it's celebrating that, but it's saying this should horrify you because it is horrifying. Okay, there's some value to that. There's also, I think, the little glimmer of what you would maybe call hope in that Sally does, spoiler alert, does survive, but it's okay. It's been 52 years, so okay. But that alone is, again, back to like nihilism. A purely nihilistic film would end in it's over. She loses too, and then the killer wins, or everybody dies, right?
Right.
So that some of these things are survivable, I think for me offers at least enough of a glimmer of a possibility that it's worth all of the mess to get to there. At the same time, as I always say, but that doesn't mean it's for everyone.
Right.
So you might go in and go like, oh, that Kutter, he is just insane. That's, I didn't see that at all. But it is kind of how I answer that question.
I mean, I've appreciated this discussion of a movie that I now appreciate this movie in a way that I never thought I might. Like when my friend Jason recommended me this movie, and he was like, "You got to watch it, man." I was like, I don't really know if I want to. And then I remember watching it and being done. I was like, that was the oddest, weirdest brain teaser of a film I've seen in a long time. And I didn't even know, and I'm glad we got to have this conversation to kind of tease out some of those themes. And I hope people listening, watching have benefited from it. Maybe it's just like, maybe it just planted a seed of a thought in your mind, and you need to go revisit the film or visit for the first time like myself. Please do that. Before we shut this down, Kirk, can you just tell people again about the book and where they can find it, and maybe like how, if they liked this conversation, what they might enjoy about the book?
Yeah, I think you'll get the benefit of the book and like this conversation. So again, you can find it on Amazon or at cuttercallaway.com. Kutter with a K, Callaway with a C. The subtitle that I now have in front of me correctly read is "What Horror Reveals About Facing the Darkness." And I think the benefit of the book is you can kind of walk through and see me thinking through some of these questions without having to go through what it takes to watch the movie, right?
Oh.
So if you are a person that's like, I'm interested in what you guys are talking about, I don't know if I have it in me, well, go read the book, see if that helps make sense, and then you can decide, okay, yeah, I'm going to go watch a couple of these films. And I think that's one of the benefits that I realized for the book side of things. A lot of people really are interested in exploring the darker, more horrific aspects of life, and they still have difficulty going and sitting in the theater and watching it. And so I think in book form, it also has discussion questions and stuff if you want to talk with other people about it. It really is trying to expand the people that expand the conversation so that more people can enter in without, kind of like you and I were describing, without that initial, like, I don't know if I can do this sort of thing. So that's my hope with it.
Awesome. Well, I'll include links for all of that for your website for pre-orders of the book. I know I'll be pre-ordering a copy of it. I'm very excited to dig into it myself. And if you've enjoyed this conversation, just give us a like, a comment, a rating, a review, all that good stuff. And hope to see you in the next video. But after everything, just remember that though the horrors may persist, so can we.